Welcome back to another episode of the Big Apple and Broad Street Sports Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Brandon Pockers, joined by my co-host, as always, Luke Milai. Luke, it is now 11:30 on a Monday night. How are you doing on this fine but very late evening?
I'm doing good, Brandon. Anytime I can talk to you, it doesn't matter what time of day it is. It's always a good time.
It's always good to know that I have that effect on people. It's great to be bringing you guys another episode, but before we get started, as always, want to remind you guys that yes, we are now on YouTube, so please be sure to like and subscribe on our videos. We'll be posting every episode from here on out on the page, so might as well subscribe now while you can because the hype train's just getting rolling. Also, if you pay attention to our Instagram accounts, there is more content flowing into there as the NBA series develop, as we inch closer to the finals, as the baseball season goes on, as we approach the NFL season. Stay tuned to our social media channels, not just Instagram, but also Twitter and TikTok, because we'll be posting any relevant clips to what is going on in the sports world. So, moving to our first topic of the day, there was a blockbuster trade in the NFL that really surprised a lot of people for not just the team he went to, but the return that was brought back for this player. As we mentioned last week, the rumors were swirling about a Julio Jones trade even before he had a cold call and went on to Undisputed with Skip and Shannon. And the report came out he did not know he was live on the air. So that is something key to think about. But Julio Jones was traded to the Tennessee Titans in exchange for a second and fourth round pick. The Titans also received a sixth round pick in conjunction with Julio Jones. So just from the outset of that trade, not diving deep into what does this mean for the Titans in general. This is I mean, it's a great trade. The Tennessee's not giving up an overt amount for an experienced superstar wide receiver, which is what Julio is. Is he on the wrong side of 30 years old? Yes. He is 32 years old with a bit of an injury history. Honestly, I think that's the reason why a first round pick wasn't used in the trade. With the age and injury history in conjunction, some teams might have been scared off, not to mention the high price tag that some teams felt that goes along with the two previous factors mentioned. But for a team in win now territory like Tennessee, I think it's an amazing trade for them, and that it's a move that only is going to make them a bigger threat this season. So, Luke, I haven't heard your thoughts on this trade so far. What did you think before we dive deep into how this impacts Tennessee and really the AFC in general?
Well, starting back with the call on Undisputed, I did not think he didn't know, but the fact that he didn't know is kind of crazy. And to think that probably facilitated a lot of these talks and moved a lot of things along a lot faster than maybe they would have beforehand, making it so public. That's pretty notable. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that. And then for the trade itself, I think when you see a second and a fourth and you think like, oh, there's no first round pick, like the Titans did a really good trade. I think they did make a good trade. And I think that trade itself is so influenced by the past market for these types of deals because, and we can say what you want about Bill O'Brien, and he sent DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals for a second, a fourth, and David Johnson. So maybe that's where like this deal sort of stemmed from, like seeing like, well, that guy's the best of the best. He went for a second and a fourth. Julio is probably right up there with him in terms of just how good of a receiver he actually is. So maybe that's where they got those numbers from. I don't think the Falcons could have done too much better. I don't think anybody was going to be throwing them much better deals than that. But I think it works for both teams. And we talked a little bit about it a couple of shows ago about the Titans and the good and the bad about it. So, well, what do you think?
I mean, taking more of a deep dive sense into it, the Titans are really a run heavy team. They are a team that relies on Derrick Henry a very heavy amount. As you could see in the past 2 seasons, he has over 2,000 rush yards apiece. I mean, he is one of the best running backs in the NFL and is one of the last few workhorses in the league. He's one of the last true guys that can get 300 plus carries without really splitting in a timeshare. So what Tennessee does, they use the run game with Henry, make that defense commit, and all of a sudden Tannehill is using play action to hit a deep pass to A.J. Brown over the top, and last year hit Corey Davis with a mid-crossing route or something else underneath. Corey Davis signed with the Jets this offseason. Tennessee let him walk. Not really of their own fruition. They didn't pick up his fifth-year option, which they definitely should have, and then Davis proceeded to have a career year finishing just under 1,000 yards receiving. By adding Julio Jones to this offense, though, Tennessee is, I don't want to say they're game plan proof, but they're pretty damn near it, because now, yes, Ryan Tannehill isn't Patrick Mahomes. Ryan Tannehill isn't Aaron Rodgers in terms of arm strength. What Ryan Tannehill is, though, is a top 15 quarterback in the National Football League. He's played like that over the past few years after having his career revitalized after the Adam Gase experience, which is what we will now call it from now on this show. Teams can now not sell out to stop Derrick Henry, because if they sell out to stop Derrick Henry, you now have Julio and A.J. Brown on the outsides to dominate. Let's also remember, this is a team that added Josh Reynolds in the slot, who played in Los Angeles and did pretty well for the Rams last year and years before that. So that's another threat in the passing game. Teams won't know where to commit. If they overcommit to the pass, Derrick Henry is going to run for 200 yards every single game. If you overcommit to the run, Ryan Tannehill is going to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns every game. Not because, he's just that good of a quarterback. No, it's because he's going to have A.J. Brown and Julio Jones in 1v1s. We both saw it when Julio was in Atlanta. How many guys would he get on him at one time? 2, 3? You can't do that in this offense, no matter if they are a run-heavy scheme. The play action passing, yes, he's not going to have the same volume as he would in that pass-heavy scheme in Atlanta. But he's on a better team overall. He's on a more winning team overall. And he's going to have so many more playmaking opportunities because, well, he has A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry on the same team now.
Yeah, their offense is going to be insane. And when we talked about it a little while ago, we mentioned how good their offense already was. I mean, they averaged over 30 points a game. You mentioned Ryan Tannehill. He had career highs in touchdowns and QBR, 33 touchdowns, over 78 QBR, threw for nearly 4,000 yards, only 7 interceptions. Like, this guy was already on fire without adding debatably the top receiver in the league. He was already putting up numbers that he's really never had in his career. The Titans were one of the best offenses in the league, and now they're adding Julio. And I think when I mentioned those stats last time, it was from a thought of maybe the Titans don't really need Julio to get over the top, and like they could put that stuff to other positions. But I've started to gain a little different perspective, and I'm trying to think about it differently. In the AFC, you're trying to beat one team, and you're trying to beat Kansas City. And the only time we've really seen someone beat Kansas City was with the defensive line in the Super Bowl, and that was the Bucs. But I think maybe the new overwhelming strategy is going to become just keep them off the field and just you got to score with them. And I think maybe an offense with Julio, A.J. Brown, and Derrick Henry, with Ryan Tannehill limiting his turnovers and pushing the ball downfield, maybe they can at least put up the same points. that's got to be their thought process. If they're making a move like this, we know the Titans think they can win now. They were in the AFC Championship 2 years ago. They made the playoffs last season. So they're an organization that is in a winning direction, and adding a guy like Julio is not going to hurt. I mean, he's making $15 million this year and then $11 million each of the next 2 years. So it's not killing them on their cap, really, which is something I was concerned about until I looked it up. I think it's a lot less of a hit than I thought it would be. So I guess props to the Titans. I think it's definitely going to help them. There's no doubt about that. Are you watching the Suns game, Brandon? Is that why you're freaking out? Yeah. But I think they're in a good spot, and they should still have money to play with to make the rest of their team better, which was my main concern. But I really like this for them.
Yeah, and let's also remember the Titans did revamp that defense this offseason. They did bring in a lot of new guys. They also drafted some guys on the O-line, so they did build out a lot of other aspects that were weak on their team and then added Julio Jones. So I think this is a team that's going to be in heavy contention in the upper echelon of the AFC. I don't think anyone in this division is even going to come close to beating them or even challenging them for that division title this year. But
not Carson and the Colts?
Absolutely not. No. No. It's not even about like the defense. Like Indy's offense isn't comparable to Tennessee now. Now, if Carson got Julio and the Colts got Julio, this is a completely different story. It would be a much more even division. I just like Tennessee way more than the other teams in the AFC South. And before we move on to remaining free agents, is there anything more you want to add about the Titans trade for Julio?
Not really. I think from a different perspective, I think it would have been more impactful if a team like the Ravens went out and got him. I still don't understand why a team like that wouldn't go get him. I know they drafted Rashad Bateman, but like that's a guy. Like that's a guy. Like you need him, especially when that position is such a big noticeable flaw in your team, and you need to give your quarterback any target he can. I mean, and it was only a second and a fourth, not only, but that's the market. I think that's something the Ravens could have done. And the Ravens are another team that's in their heads are in win now mode. They made the playoffs the last few years, and they're looking to make that leap that they haven't been able to make. And I think for them, a guy like Julio fits them and obviously helps them as he would any team a lot more than the Titans. But I like it for the Titans. I'm just wondering why other teams maybe were too slow. Maybe they got outbid. I don't know.
I mean, maybe it was money reasons in Baltimore's case, but I mean,
that's true.
For the same reasons we say this trade was a win for Tennessee, it would have been a win for Baltimore. I mean, it would have made the Ravens that much less one-dimensional. I mean, having the Thunder and Lightning really of Marquise Brown and Julio Jones, and then adding Rashad Bateman to a mix that already includes Mark Andrews, and then adding in the speed of Lamar Jackson and that run game. I mean, if they added Julio, how would you game plan that team? You wouldn't. You really wouldn't be able to game plan it. You'd be walking into defensive meetings that week being like, listen, we can choose to one, stop Lamar Jackson in the run game and hope that Julio doesn't torch us. We can sell out to stop the passing game, and then Lamar Jackson could run for 200 yards on us, or try to play balance and pick and choose during the game. I mean, it would have made the Ravens that much more better of a team. And all I can say is that teams like the Browns, the Steelers, and the Bengals, and whoever is on Baltimore's schedule, they are very happy that Baltimore did not land Julio Jones. And speaking on landing certain players, there are still a lot of good free agents out there. Not the big names that are signed to these mega deals early in the offseason or big guys that need to be traded. I mean, there's some solid role players still out there that I think could definitely contribute to teams if they're signed, to be honest. And looking at NFLTradeRumors.com, they have a list of the top available free agents remaining. It's a list of 40 players, and looking at the top 10, we got number 1, Morgan Moses, 30-year-old offensive tackle. Previous team was the Washington football team. We then got Sheldon Richardson, Steven Nelson, Mitchell Schwartz, Brian Poole, Russell Okung, Melvin Ingram, Richard Sherman, Rick Wagner, and Justin Houston. In the 20s, some names that stick out: KJ Wright, Olivier Vernon, Le'Veon Bell, Malik Hooker, Trey Boston, Jarrell Casey, Geno Atkins, Todd Gurley, Duke Johnson, even lower down, Everson Griffin, Kenny Vaccaro, Nickel Roby Coleman. I mean, there's a lot of decent players out there. I mean, Kawan Alexander, 27-year-old linebacker, Gary and Conley, 26-year-old corner. I mean, there are still some decent guys that, while they won't be the upper echelon players on your team, they still can contribute and bring something of value to a squad. I mean, just from a pure Jets perspective, I think 2 guys that immediately stick out for me are 3: Morgan Moses as a depth piece or another starter on that offensive line, Brian Poole as a slot corner, re-signed as he filled that role for the Jets last year, did a pretty good job of it, and Richard Sherman as not just a guy to contribute, but really teach Robert Saleh's defensive scheme to some of the younger guys like Bryce Hall and other young corners on the Jets, and really help them be molded into solid NFL players. So, Luke, hearing some of those guys on the list, who do you think would be a good fit for the Eagles, and who do you think should be snatched up right away?
I mean, for the Eagles, if I'm looking at the Eagles, they're obviously in sort of a rebuilding mode. So I think I'd look at guys of younger ages that have more potential, really, no matter what position. Like a guy like Malik Hooker is really interesting to me. Only 25 years old. He's on this list. That one really stuck out to me. But something I was thinking about I know some of these guys, a lot of the guys on this list I'm looking at right now are in their 30s, and that could be a tribute to it. But when you look at the playoffs last year, and there's never been a year that was more evident of how important it is to have a good offensive line and to have good depth on your offensive line, and how it can save you from, like, the Buccaneers killed everyone with their defensive line. And we can keep saying that forever and ever, but it's true. You need a good offensive line if you're going to hang in the big games against the biggest teams. And the fact that 3 of the top 6 guys on this list are offensive tackles, like, I can't imagine that there's not a team that is ready to go win that could not use these guys as starters or as depth. It's pretty interesting to me. And then Mitchell Schwartz was on the Chiefs, and he's on this list. And we know how the Chiefs struggled with it in the Super Bowl. So that's interesting. I think for the rebuilding teams like the Eagles, there's guys that are younger on this list that I think are definitely worth a shot to look after. And then there's still guys that can contribute to winning at the highest level on this list too, which really every team could have a purpose with these 40 guys and beyond these 40 guys. So I'm surprised there's still so many, like, notable guys that are still here.
Yeah, it's a very interesting list, and even lower on the list, I mean, you mentioned Malik Hooker. I think despite the injuries, he could still be a great contributor at safety. I mean, Kawan Alexander, I mean, young 27-year-old linebacker that can still cover a little bit. I mean, that's a hot commodity in the NFL. I'm kind of surprised he isn't signed. I guess that's another guy with injury risk and past injuries. So pretty interesting list to see some of the guys that are really still out there. And as the NFL offseason winds down, make sure to keep it locked and loaded to the podcast, because as our favorite season approaches, which is football, because the book it picks are hot and heavy during that season. just keep it locked and loaded, because we're going to provide some great content for you. Not just then, but now, as we transition to really a fun sport in the playoffs that I've gotten into more and more over the years. And there's really nothing like a good NBA playoff series and just watching guys become stars in front of your eyes and really taking over games. And as we recap round one, I hate to say it, I hate to start with this series, but there's really no one outside of maybe Kawhi Leonard in the first round that really encapsulated what a superstar in the NBA does for a team in terms of like sheer performance this year than Trae Young. Trae Young was not only the deciding factor in this series, he was also probably the best player in this series, save maybe a few stretches where Bogdanovich was literally not missing a single shot. So, I mean, just to keep it short and sweet with this Knicks series, Julius Randle did not play well. RJ Barrett did not play well. Derrick Rose was turning back the clock, trying to keep this Knicks team alive. And while the Knicks defense really did all they could to contain the Hawks and try to shut them down, the sheer fact of the matter, despite me picking the Knicks to win the series, maybe that was a little bias on my part, but the sheer fact of the matter is that the Atlanta Hawks were a much more talented team. If you think about it, before the season, there was a reason that I thought a 25-win season or something around that range was a good season for the Knicks. It's because I didn't expect all these guys to come together and show that they're built for the future, that the New York Knicks are finally back. And unfortunately, things didn't click this series. And you saw what the opposite end of the spectrum could look like if this team didn't come together. It was that lottery type team. But in spite of that, they played gritty, they played hard, they held them to small scores in a few games. They did win a game in the series. They weren't swept. And honestly, it's nothing but up here for this Knicks team, but you got to give props to the Hawks, man. I'm in shock that they're playing at this level, and as we'll get to after the recap, they didn't exactly stop their torrid shooting pace. So, Luke, as the resident, Philadelphia fan on the show, what did you think of the Sixers? Not Sixers, the Hawks Knicks series in the first round.
I mean, I'm right there with you. I thought the Knicks were going to win the series, and I just was so caught off guard by how, like, the Hawks are a very young team at really almost every position, and they played really mature. I mean, that Knicks defense is very good, and they will rough you up. And going into Madison Square Garden and having to win multiple games, I think that's something that's very impressive and can't be overlooked. I mean, these Hawks players, they could have been out of it, and nobody would have blamed them if they lost to the Knicks. They didn't have really any expectations either. They had nothing to lose, and they just put on a show, especially going back to Atlanta. They just dominated in Atlanta. But I was impressed. Like you, I did not think they had this in them. I figured Trae would do Trae things, but a guy like Bogdanovich, I mean, that guy's really stepping up, and he's really surprised me. And I think they have a really solid team around Trae. I mean, they just got a lot of snipers. They got Herter, Bogdanovich, Gallinari off the bench, Lou Will off the bench. Clint Capella's holding it down in the paint. Like they have a solid team. Like they have really solid role players everywhere. And Trae's just going to go as far as he can with them. And I think he's already exceeded any expectations. I don't know what people really thought from the Hawks. Thought the Hawks were going to do this season, especially having to fire Lloyd Pierce halfway through the year. The fact that they've turned it around with an interim head coach and had this response, it's very impressive. And I don't think many people expected it, but props to them.
Yeah, it was really an amazing turnaround from this Atlanta team, considering where they were at. I mean, everyone knew what talent that the Hawks had. I mean, a team with Trae Young, John Collins, Bogdanovich, Gallinari. I mean, the list goes on and on. You mentioned Lou Williams too. I mean, the sheer fact was this is a team that should be having success, and it just doesn't surprise me to see them finally turn it on. And as someone that liked the Hawks before this series, I hate seeing them run into the Knicks and being the buzzsaw that ends the Cinderella season for this team. But it was bound to happen at some point. Even if they beat Atlanta, they weren't making it past the next round. So with that in mind, we are jumping to the next series. The Philadelphia Sixers easily defeated the Washington Wizards 4-1. Really wasn't much of a contest throughout the whole series. Obviously, a little bit of a scare with Joel Embiid exiting the game early, then the Sixers losing the game, but they've rallied in game 5 to close out the series. Don't get the sweep, but still finish it with relative ease. I mean, Luke, I'll start here with you. I don't think there's much to say here other than the Sixers did what they were supposed to do. They didn't have any sort of letdown. They showed why they're a 1 seed. Is there really anything else to add outside of that?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, the most notable thing to happen in this series was Joel Embiid tearing his meniscus. I mean, I don't think the Sixers winning 4-1 was any surprise to anyone. Yeah, as you said, it's exactly what they had to do, and really just wish they could have gotten out of it like fully healthy. I really thought they were going to, because they had gone like 2 straight fourth quarters without having to have the starters. In games 2 and 3, they won very decisively. So seeing all these injuries, like Luka was banged up. Who else got hurt? There were other injuries. Obviously, guys like Jamal Murray before the playoffs. But there's just been injuries around the league, and I thought the Sixers were going to dodge it. James Harden just had one. But obviously they couldn't. Joel still went out and played game 1 yesterday, but still pretty scary. That's what I took away from the series. Sixers did what they had to do, but still going to be a lot tougher going forward if this injury from this series continues to linger.
Yeah, that's really what stuck out to me too. It really had nothing to do with Washington itself. It's more so what does the Embiid injury mean for the Sixers' future. Jumping ahead to the other series in the Eastern Conference, or one of the 2 last series that really wasn't all that impressive in the Eastern Conference. I mean,
East wasn't too interesting this year.
Brooklyn made quick work of Boston, and don't think anyone's surprised by that. Big 3 really dominated. Obviously, you mentioned James Harden's injury. We'll get to that once we start our round 2 discussion. But yeah, I mean, looking at some of the scores, Nets 104, Celtics 93, Nets 130, Celtics 108. Obviously, Celtics took game 3, and then the Nets just clobbered Boston in games 4 and 5. I mean, KD did what KD does. Kyrie did what Kyrie does. The bench is firing on all cylinders for Brooklyn. There's nothing more to say. Brooklyn is an absolute juggernaut in the Eastern Conference, and no matter who they play, they're going to be a tough out for anybody. And jumping to the last series, which I guess you could say it's a little bit of a surprise, but the Milwaukee Bucks swept the Miami Heat. And for a team that was in the finals last year, me and Luke discussed it on the show previously. This is a Heat team that I think was immensely overrated. I've realized that very early on in this series. I think much less talked about fact is that them and the Lakers are the 2 teams that had the least amount of rest in the bubble. Obviously, not a great excuse. You see what Denver is doing. Denver was also in the bubble very long, but it has to be taken into account that this is probably a team that's very fatigued. They're a little tired. They didn't have the same amount of rest to gear up for the next season. And I think Miami should be a decent threat. I'm thinking the 4 or 5 range for next year as a team, just by having Jimmy Butler. I think Tyler Hero will be fine. I think Bam Adebayo will take a step forward. Just, it's never good to see a team get swept, especially a young one and supposedly exciting one like the Miami Heat.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point you made about the shortened offseason. That could have contributed a lot to their injuries down the stretch. I mean, Anthony Davis was banged up all year, including the playoffs. LeBron James missed a huge chunk of time with an ankle injury, and it's possible that it was still lingering in this series. So it's tough. I think I agree. The Heat will be back. Jimmy Butler's going to be Jimmy Butler as long as he's healthy. I mean, they're going to be in the playoffs every year. But I do think they benefited from all those neutral site games. They were a young team last year that didn't have to go on the road into any big environments, and they played well when they had to. But I think this is a better representation of them, and I think it also really shows you who the Bucks are, at least who we thought they were after round one. But they're a very deep team, they're just a great defensive team with Giannis, Middleton, and Holiday. That it's very hard with a team featuring really Jimmy Butler's their only guy like that can make a play on offense. Dragic, Hero, like those guys can't do it. So if you're putting like Giannis or Middleton or Holiday on Jimmy Butler for the whole game, I mean, it's easy to see why the Heat would struggle. And I think that's really what happened, and the Bucks were just dominant.
Yeah, and moving on to the Western Conference, starting off with a series that really wasn't even close, and one that both myself and Luke took a major swing and a miss on. The Utah Jazz had absolutely no issues with the Memphis Grizzlies, and I think that this is a product, personally, of me underrating Donovan Mitchell because, man, he is a superstar. He is living up to every bit of the Dwayne Wade comparisons that have been thrown his way. I think he's that good of a player. I think he will continue to develop to be that good of a player, but he is that threat that no one thought the Jazz had. I still think Mitchell is underrated, but he proved in this series that they are not to be taken lightly as a 1 seed and that they have led the Western Conference the entire year for a reason. I don't think there's anything more to say outside of that, besides the fact that Ja Morant is going to be a star in this league for a very, very, very long time. And hot take, maybe not a hot take, I don't think he finished his career in Memphis. In fact, I think if things don't change, he could be out of there sooner rather than later, but Memphis also has an exciting young core around them. So really, I think the ball's in Memphis's court. It's really make or break the next few years for them and how they build that young core around Morant.
Yeah, I agree. Donovan Mitchell, he's cold. I mean, there's no better way to show his value than them losing game one without him, and then they win the next four with him. But there were some close games in there, and he proved he can be a closer. Like, he took over games at the end when they needed him most. And I think that's something that we knew all the potential and like the flashes he's had, but now the fact that he's doing it in the playoffs as the best team record-wise in the NBA, the fact that he's keeping it up in the postseason, I mean, it's very impressive. And I think the Jazz are going to be a bigger problem than you and I both thought.
And especially as we move on to this series, because the Jazz could have the best shot in this conference of advancing, or one of the best shots in this conference of advancing, because the Phoenix Suns knocked off the Los Angeles Lakers, winning the series 4-2. And this is one of the main series I wanted to discuss in round one before we jump to round two, because I think it's a combination of, one, Chris Paul's value is exactly what I thought it was. This dude has completely transformed everybody on this Phoenix Suns team, and they are a completely different team when he is on the court versus when he is off the court. Honestly, it does not take an amazing basketball mind to see that. It is an extremely noticeable difference to see that Chris Paul, even at his ripe age of 37, is still such a vital part of a winning basketball team, like he has been his whole career. And he's still playing like a perennial all-star, because I think he still has the talent of a perennial all-star. I don't know how, I feel like the guy's literally been in the league since, or basically been in the league since I was born. I've grown up with Chris Paul my entire life. He's been the same player and has not changed. He has not taken a step down whatsoever. And as we'll move on to our round 2 discussion, I mean, tonight, Phoenix is beating Denver 105-90, and Chris Paul is just playing incredibly again. I mean, he's having another great start to a series. And on the flip side, whereas Phoenix's star, yes, he did have the shoulder injury. Yes, he did have his struggles. Chris Paul battled through his injuries and was able to, deal with the shoulder. A shoulder isn't as serious as what Anthony Davis had to deal with. And Anthony Davis, unfortunately, is starting to really live up to his moniker of not being able to stay on the court. He's living up to people calling him injury prone, and he can't be a real superstar because he doesn't play enough, and he'll never win anything because he just can't stay healthy. And I don't know if it's his play style or he's just brittle in it and of himself, or he doesn't have the right recovery process, or he doesn't do this or doesn't do that. It just seems like that whenever the Lakers needed him most this year, Anthony Davis was just not on the court. And when you have a not 100% LeBron James on the court, because let's remember, LeBron also has not been operating at 100% for the majority of this season, and a extremely below average supporting cast that the Lakers had between Andre Drummond and Kyle Kuzma and KCP. I mean, nobody was helping LeBron out there. It was honestly sad to watch at times during some of these games. The Lakers just weren't built to win this year. I mean, coming into this season, I just never saw how the Lakers were going to win a championship outside literally LeBron going Super Saiyan in the playoffs again. That was their only shot again. And especially when the injuries started to happen during the course of the season, it was going to be very hard for the Lakers to win a championship, not just at below average strength compared to injuries, but doing a play-in game and then going to a series and then having to win another series. And I'm sorry, it just wasn't going to happen this year. This wasn't the Lakers' year. And with LeBron only getting older and unfortunately Anthony Davis keep getting hurt, I mean, how much longer is this window open for LeBron and the Lakers to be that upper echelon of the league? And are we approaching the king of the league changing hands? I don't think we're there just yet, but is this the start of the reign of LeBron really coming to an end?
I mean, I think we're close. I mean, it all hinges on health, though. I mean, if LeBron and Anthony Davis are healthy, they're going to be fine. I mean, this team, I was one of those people that thought they improved this past offseason. I mean, they lose guys like Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee, and they replace them with the reigning sixth man of the year, Montrezl Harrell, and they bring in guys like Marc Gasol and Andre Drummond, who should, on paper, at least upgrades at that position. And then they lose a starter in Danny Green, and they replace him with a guy like Dennis Schroeder, who was incredible with the Thunder last year. So, there were reasons to be optimistic about this Lakers team, but, I mean, you can put any role players of any caliber around LeBron and Anthony Davis. If LeBron and Anthony Davis aren't healthy, it's not going to matter. And I think LeBron, even he still went out. He put up, I think, 29, 8 and 8 or something like that in Game 6. But he's just not the same anymore. And I think we saw a little bit of that in the last postseason. Anthony Davis was really good in last year's postseason, and I don't know if that gets talked about enough. He was the piece that LeBron needed, and LeBron is still very good at basketball, one of the best players in the league. But if you're going to win in the NBA, you need the second piece. I don't care who you are. You need another guy. And with Anthony Davis, when he was trying to play, he obviously wasn't 100%, so he wasn't doing it, and then not playing at all. I mean, the Lakers didn't really have a shot. And this is a good Suns team. As we're seeing tonight, they're going to go on to win game 1 against the Nuggets. So this is a team that could contend for a title, and the Lakers just were not ready to play against a team like that so early. And that's what you get when you're the 7th seed. I mean, the Suns earned their position, they earned their spot, and they deserve to move on.
Yeah, I mean, how could we forget about Devin Booker too? I mean, between Devin Booker, Chris Paul, I mean, just Jay Crowder playing great, DeAndre Ayton becoming a double machine and finally starting to live up to his potential. I mean, like you said, the Lakers they did not have the health really. I mean, it really boils down to that. They didn't have the health to compete with this Phoenix team. Anthony Davis was banged up. LeBron James was banged up. Hell, you could say their entire roster was banged up because most of their roster had a shortened season once again because of the bubble. It's not the excuse you can rely on, but it really is a contributing factor when you have a shorter offseason and play a season close to regular length. So it's really interesting to see the Lakers be out so early. LeBron be out of the playoffs in the first round for the first time in his career, which that's incredible in and of itself because it really shows his greatness and how amazing of a player he is. I think it's also the first time in really, I think, close to a decade that LeBron or Steph Curry haven't been in the playoffs, which that's another really cool stat to think about. And moving on to the next playoff series, this is involving the team that is playing tonight. The Denver Nuggets knocked off the Portland Trailblazers in this series 4-2, and it really wasn't that lopsided. This was one of, if not really the most contested series in all of the playoffs so far. I think it probably slots in for number 2 for me behind the series we're going to talk about next. But my major takeaway from this is that Damian Lillard can only do so much. And Damian Lillard can honestly do a hell of a lot for a basketball team. But this is a Nuggets team that is missing their 2 starting guards, namely Jamal Murray, who has been out for the season for a few weeks. I mean, yeah, going on a few weeks. And they still lost the series. I mean, it shows you how good Nikola Jokic is, how deep this Nuggets team is. I mean, Michael Porter Jr. really stepping up. They still have Aaron Gordon. They still have some pretty good guard play, the Nuggets do. But the Portland Trailblazers really need to make some moves because if Dame Lillard doesn't like what he sees, I mean, is it a stretch to say that he could be donning the blue and orange for the Knicks next year? I mean, or donning the red and black of the Miami Heat? I listen. I think it's a good possibility he could get traded, and if he gets traded, then McCollum's going to get traded, and Portland just fired their head coach, and the guy Dame Lillard wanted, who was Jason Kidd, he withdrew his name from the coaching search. So it's like, okay, what's going on here? Obviously, it's all speculation. You don't really know what the situation holds, but also it's the NBA. We've seen guys request trades on a dime. I mean, let's not forget the James Harden situation. It went from, rumblings here, rumblings there to, yes, James Harden has demanded a trade and is looking like a meatball showing up to games. No, he isn't actually like that. He's just wearing layers of clothing to look out of shape and just make Houston unbelievably mad. I don't think Dame is that type of guy. He has that just Mamba mentality and just like attack dog. Like, I'm going to just win it for my team and myself. But it's reaching a certain point for him that he's going to have to value either loyalty or winning. And with teams being not loyal to guys and just kicking them to the curb when they're done. Personally, I'd value the winning. I'd want to have a championship on my resume when I'm as good of a player that as Damian Lillard is. And unfortunately, Portland isn't doing the biggest amount possible that they can to surround him with the talent to compete with now teams like Utah and Phoenix and like last year, the Lakers and all these other upper echelon teams in the West. And with Klay Thompson returning to the court next year, that Western Conference is not getting any easier. So, Luke, what are your thoughts on the fallout for the Blazers in this series and really just this Nuggets Blazers series in general?
Well, it's really interesting because this is an age when this is a generation of guys that have been known to go and create bigger teams and go after that title instead of trying to stay at the team that drafted them and try and win it there. But Dame has time and time again been like that one outspoken guy. He's like, I'm not leaving. Like, I'm going to do it this way because in his head, that's the right way. And I do think if we are getting closer to maybe it not being realistic, and he's been phenomenal. And even if he doesn't want to leave, there's still maybe an avenue where if they just can't get over the hump, do they just try and rebuild? And do they realize like Dame's got so much value? Like, do they just make a trade and just pretty much give up whatever window they have? But it's tough. They're just not good enough at this point. Dame is for real. I mean, he's the only reason they were even in this position with all the injuries. He carried them to this 6th seed, but I don't know. I don't really know what it is. I think their defense really needs a lot of work. I mean, him and McCollum are great, but they're not playing defense. Nurkic is a really solid center, but he couldn't do much with Jokic. Not that anybody really can, but he was fouling out of almost every game, putting them in impossible situations where Robert Covington has to guard Jokic. Like they were just in a really bad spot. And I think they've got a lot to improve on. And during their exit interviews today, their GM was saying how the team was really well built and the loss was on the players and the coaches and not him. And like, that's something that like really like surprised me. Like, really? Like, you got Damian Lillard on your team and you're saying, well, the players and the coaches, they didn't do good enough. But I hope they can look inward at themselves as an organization, realize they just need changes. And I think it starts with the coach. Like, Terry's been there a while and he just couldn't get over the hump, whether it's all his fault or not. This is usually what happens in any league. You're going to get a new coaching change. You're going to get that new voice. And I think that's what they need. And we're going to see if it pays off. And for the Nuggets, we know how good Jokic is. He's incredible. And he's not going to let them go down to the Suns team without a fight either. But I was really impressed with Austin Rivers and Campazzo. They're two guards that have been playing a lot with the absence of Murray and Barton, and they played really well. I missed a couple of their games, so I'd go back and watch the highlights on YouTube, and it felt like it was Austin Rivers in the 4th quarter, like hitting big shot after big shot, and that's something that you really felt like this Denver team was going to lack without Jamal Murray. That's sort of his role, and for at least the first round, Austin Rivers sort of filled that void, and they collectively did as well. I mean, Jokic puts all these guys in such a good position to succeed. I mean, for them, it's just shooting practice shots with the way he attracts double teams and gets them wide open. They just got to hit them, and in the first round they did. So we'll see if they can continue that. But the Nuggets are very good.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Portland has to hope that they have the Dwayne Casey to shoot. What was the
He went to Detroit. They fired him.
Right. Yeah. No. What was the next Raptors coach name? It was Nick Nurse. Yeah. I don't know.
The guy that refuses to let Joel Embiid shoot the ball every time they play. I hate that guy. He's so smart.
I don't know why his name escaped my head, but yeah, the Blazers.
They also brought in Kawhi Leonard. I mean, they could add a lot of guys at coach when they bring in Kawhi Leonard. It's a little.
Yeah, that's also true. And moving on to the last series of the first round, the LA Clippers defeated the Dallas Mavericks 4-3. Now, This series, I feel like, is a little bit, Luke, what do you call it? Misleading is the right word.
It was weird.
And literally, you could basically say that the only reason this series went 7 games is because Luka Doncic is a Dallas Maverick. I just do not understand how Luka is able to carry a team like this night in and night out, because in every single one of these games I watched, the Clippers have so much more talent on the offensive end. They have so much more talent on the defensive end. And to be honest, on this team, the Mavericks, that as it's currently constructed, Luka's second and third best pieces are Tim Hardaway Jr. and Boban Marjanovic. That's not a joke. That seriously is not a joke. And then Dorian Finney-Smith. And I a little bit of Jalen Brunson sprinkled in, but he's more of a come off the bench guy. What happened to Kristaps Porzingis? The dude is terrible now. He plays like he's like 5'10". He cannot back anyone down in the post.
And he's crying that he's
not getting the ball
Luka.
enough.
I'm
so glad the Knicks trade him. That is the Tim Hardaway Jr. trade from now on, because it's just a wash. It's honestly just a wash. Like, neither team is benefiting from this trade, to be honest. Like, well, technically the Knicks did because they got first round picks. But man, can you imagine Luka and Dame teaming up? I mean, both guys need help more than anything.
It's true.
That would be very interesting. But in all seriousness, this series showed why, to your point that you mentioned earlier, that second piece is so important to winning. Because yes, while Kawhi literally turned into 2019 playoffs Kawhi again, the Clippers don't win the series if Paul George doesn't hit a few clutch shots, or Reggie Jackson doesn't step up to hit a few threes, or in Game 6 and Game 7, Luke Kennard coming off the bench and hitting some clutch threes. The Clippers have the right pieces around their star players. Luka is having to score 50 points or 40 points a game to even give the Mavericks a shot to win. They're banking on the Clippers missing their shots, which is what happened in the games that they won. They're banking on the Clippers to miss their shots and Luka to literally not miss anything. And not even in a joking sense, Kristaps Porzingis is a liability to this Mavericks team, because for the money he's being paid, he's playing like a role player. Yes, obviously, I think the injuries have hampered him a little bit. I think that he's definitely not the same player he was in New York. But when you're coming out immediately after the series and complaining about your usage and how you're not getting the ball as much, dude, are you scoring 45 points, 50 points a game and hitting step back threes that literally maybe two other guys in the league could hit? No, you're not. And when your other best role players are Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dorian Finney-Smith, I love those guys for what they do. When you don't have that second guy that can take some of the weight off of Luka's shoulders, they're just not going to get the job done against a team like the Clippers. And they showed that. Even with the Mavericks taking a 2-0 lead in the series, the Clippers still had more talent, and they finally overcame adversity. And they're going to be a scary out the rest of this postseason, because now they know that they can rally back. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle the rest of the postseason.
Yeah, starting with Luka, I mean, I'm excited for the day that he can play a playoff series where he's not against Kawhi Leonard. I mean, that's what he's done his first 2 playoff series against debatably the best defender in the NBA, but he's incredible. I mean, this is a Clippers team that had a completely different rotation the entire season, and Luka just destroyed it. I mean, Ty Lue got to the point where he could only play people Luka's size when Luka was in the game, like, because he would just run pick and rolls and he'd kill him. So they were starting like Reggie, Kawhi, Paul George, Marcus Morris, and then Nick Batum. Like, they couldn't even start Zubats because they knew he'd get abused in the pick and roll. They couldn't put Beverly in because Luka said he was too small. They couldn't put him in. They couldn't put Rondo in the game for very long. Like, these guys only got in when Luka came out. Then Ty Lue could throw them all in. It's insane the impact he had in this series where, like, only guys his size were allowed to play on the other team. It's crazy. And for the Clippers, it's a series they were supposed to win, but I'm still impressed because, I mean, Luka's incredible. And nothing is a guarantee in the postseason. And now they get to go up against the Jazz team that played better than anybody this year. So it'll be interesting to see the Jazz's strategy and if the Clippers go back to like their rotations from the season, the way they did them all year, or if they stick with what they had in this series. I mean, Ty Lue's been a guy that has been very good at adjusting in the playoffs. I mean, he's always had LeBron, but now here I thought he made some good adjustments in this series as well. So it'll be fun to see. I mean, two very good 3-point shooting teams. The Clippers have like 6 guys shooting over 40% from 3. The Jazz, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, they shoot more threes than anybody and they hit the 3rd best percentage of anybody. So there's going to be a lot of 3-pointers in this series. The old heads are going to hate it, but I think it'll be a good one. It's interesting. The Jazz and the Clippers, it's just, I don't know. These aren't like the top. These are some of the top teams in the NBA, but it's interesting to see them matched up. I'm excited to see what goes on.
I guess we're jumping to round 2 without transition, so I'm going to insert it right here. It is now time to talk about round 2. Luke, thank you for your great analysis about the Jazz and Clippers series.
Thanks, Brandon. I didn't even think about it. I just started talking.
Well, it is also 12:29 in the morning, so I can't really blame you for that. I really have nothing else to add. I think what you said is completely right. It's going to be a really good series. A lot of 3 balls. This is 2 of the best shooting teams in the league. It's going to be fun to see how Donovan Mitchell stacks up against this team, personally for me. But I'm just excited either way. And jumping to the other Western Conference series that actually kicked off tonight as we are recording the episode, it has actually gone final, game 1. The Phoenix Suns defeated the Denver Nuggets 122-105. The X Factor himself, Chris Paul, had 21 points and 11 assists, carrying Phoenix to victory. I mean, honestly, he's my X Factor this series. He's going to be my X Factor for as long as the Phoenix Suns are in the postseason. It's really what it boils down to for me. Yes, Devin Booker is absolutely incredible. But with that being said, Chris Paul takes some of the load off Booker. Booker doesn't have to be the ball handler, the main scorer, the distributor. Chris Paul can do a lot of that stuff and leave Booker to just absolutely dominate opposing defenses and be the attacking, really shooting guard that I think he is best suited for and what his best role is, because when he's in that position, he's going to drop 30 points just about every game. So I'm very excited to see that. And on Denver's side, it's going to be interesting to see how they respond. They have the most likely MVP candidate in Nikola Jokic, and it should be interesting to see how Denver game plans for game 2 against this very impressive Phoenix Suns team.
Yeah, I mean, if Chris is playing at the level he played at the end of the Lakers series now in game 1 today, they're going to be very tough to beat because we know that Devin Booker's one of the best scorers in the league. We know DeAndre Ayton's played like his size and played like his potential as of late in this season. So, I mean, it's really going to be, and Michael Porter Jr. and Jokic are just going to have to be superstars if they're going to win this series. I think we know Jokic is capable of it, but it's going to be the type of thing where Michael Porter Jr. has to be that second guy. I mean, we keep talking about it, but that's how you win. And I don't think he's quite there yet, but for them to be able to compete, that's what's going to have to happen. And just watching Devin Booker and Chris Paul do all this stuff, and the fact that the Suns have so many good role players like Bridges and Saric and Crowder and Campaign, like they're just a very deep team, and it's going to be very tough for anybody to beat them. And this is a Nuggets team that we mentioned is missing one of their best two players. So it's looking sunny on this one, Brandon.
Oh man, we are breaking out the puns very early in the morning. I'm impressed, and not even to break out a pun here as we move on to the Eastern Conference. Goodness gracious, what is happening in this Brooklyn Nets series? It's looking like a good old fashioned what whooping. It's my podcast. I can say it's gonna look a good old fashioned ass whooping right now down in Brooklyn because the Milwaukee Bucks cannot play with the Nets, regardless of if James Harden is in the lineup or not. And Budenholzer and the Bucks and Jan, they need to make as many adjustments as it takes to just win one game, because whatever they are doing right now, it is just not working. Point blank, period. They cannot stop the Nets. Kyrie Irving is getting whatever he wants. Kevin Durant is getting whatever he wants. I mean, for goodness sake, they won by 39 points tonight, Luke. I mean, I don't even know what else to say about this series besides the Nets literally came in like, yeah, we know we're better than you. We are now going to show that we are better than you. Everyone's saying that, oh, Milwaukee's going to win. They're going to give them a series. Well, as of now, no, they're not.
Yeah, it's wild because on paper you look at Milwaukee and they have to be one of the best equipped teams to stop the superstars of the Nets, or at least slow them down. You aren't going to stop those guys, but you can slow them down. I mean, a guy like Giannis matching up with Durant, or even Middleton or Holiday on him, and then no Harden for basically the entirety of these two games. I think he played like 40 seconds in game one. But now you get Holiday or Middleton on Kyrie, and then you're just worrying about Joe Harris shooting threes. Blake Griffin is all of a sudden athletic again. It's crazy. Like the amount of weapons this Nets team still has without James Harden. I mean, I'm starting to think, what if they had James Harden? Like what would that be happening then? Would they be winning by 60? And this was a series that I think a lot of people thought was going to be very good and very close, just because these are two incredible teams. They're thought to be some of the favorites to come out of the East, despite not being the one seed. But it's wild. And I don't want to like overreact too much because we just saw the Clippers come back from a 2-0 deficit, but this just feels different. I mean, the Bucks got manhandled, and there's really no reason to think that the Nets don't get at least one in Milwaukee and like just coast to the end of this series in 4 or 5, at the worst 6. But right now, I mean, the Bucks, as you said, they have a lot they have to change. It looked like, I mean, Chris Middleton had 17, Drew Holiday only had 13. Like, you're not going to win, especially against this Nets team, who, even with your best defenders, they're going to score 115, 120, 130 points. Someone other than Giannis is going to have to put up 30 just to compete with this Nets team, because clearly they're not going to stop him. No matter what we thought, they're not going to stop him. So they got to put up points, and that's what they're not doing right now.
Also, something to note in this series so far, Milwaukee cannot shoot from behind the arc. It is actually like glaring how bad they are shooting from beyond the arc. I think at one point in time, just watching the back end of the game today, the Nets were shooting something like 21 of 42 from 3, and Milwaukee was shooting like 6 of 31. That can't I'm sorry, that just cannot happen. If they want a shot, if they even want to have a shot, like even without Harden, you can't hit basically under, what is that, like 20% of your threes at that point, 6 of 31. Let me check the math. Yeah, under 20%. They shot basically 19% from 3 today. That's like worse. That's on par to what the Knicks were doing in that one game against the Hawks. And it's just terrible. It cannot happen if they want to make it even a series, let alone winning it. Just, I'm sorry. I don't think it's an overreaction when you're comparing it to the Mavericks series. I think it's completely different. And I think the Nets are just going to be coasting to the Eastern Conference Finals. And lastly, goodness gracious, I feel like we've been talking about basketball forever, and I really don't care. I love it. The Philadelphia 76ers were knocked off by the Atlanta Hawks in the first game of the series. And there's a lot of different ways you could view this game. You could view it from just looking at the first half, in which the Philadelphia Sixers got bludgeoned. I mean, Atlanta went on a 20 to the overrun. They weren't missing from beyond the arc. You could look at it from a second half lens, in which Philadelphia stormed back to make it a 2-point game at one point. I think that I'm going to fall somewhere in the middle. And I know that's probably kind of a cop-out, especially in this reactionary world. And yes, I've been reactionary before. But the Hawks, as they showed in the Knicks series, are an insane three-point shooting team. This is a team where if you give them open looks, and Philly gave them plenty of those in the beginning of the game, especially from the corner, they're not going to miss. With guys like DeAndre Hunter, Bogdanovich. I think it's Bogdan.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, with Herter, with Trae Young, with John Collins. If you give these guys open opportunities, more than likely they're not going to miss. I mean, there's a reason this team shot basically 60% against the Knicks from three in 2+ games. On the other hand, once you saw Philadelphia make adjustments on the defensive end, you saw that Atlanta offense, I want to say come to a screeching halt, but they weren't the same potent team that was going on that 20-0 run. Philadelphia was able to make a steady comeback, and Atlanta made stupid turnovers because when you look at it, this Hawks team is very young and very inexperienced. You have guys on the Sixers that have played in very tightly contested playoff series. I mean, look no further than the Raptors series, which went 7 games. Yes, did the outcome go the Sixers' way? No, it did not. But they gained very valuable experience. They know how to play in the playoffs. Danny Green has been in multiple finals. Seth Curry has been in the playoffs now. Ben Simmons has seen, unfortunately, what his shortcomings mean in playoff games. Joel Embiid knows how to carry himself in the playoffs. Dwight Howard. Most of the Sixers team has been in the playoffs in one form or another. It varies round the round. It just boils down to they know how to conduct themselves. This Hawks team, there's maybe one or two guys. I mean, Lou Williams and probably a select few like Solomon Hill that have truly played in playoff series. Trae Young's an outlier because Trae Young's a superstar. It doesn't matter. He's going to drop his 30 points regardless. He has the mentality and the moxie. But I guess this is my long-winded way of saying I think the Sixers are going to be fine. I don't care that they lost game 1. If they come out flat in game 2, that's a different story. But seeing how they battled back in game 1, how they made it a close game at the end, how Doc Rivers finally did make adjustments to take Danny Green off of Trae Young after Trae Young was just eviscerating him and making Danny Green not know where he was standing. Yeah, I think the Sixers will end up being fine, to be completely honest. I think they'll still I'm still confident that they're going to win this series. But it hurts that they lost the first game. It does. You want your team to come out on a stronger foot, but I think that it's important to remember that there's nuance and that you have to keep the whole game in perspective, and that the Sixers did adjust and they did slow down Atlanta's offense. And I think that's very promising going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I took a lot more out of the back half of the game than the front half. I mean, the Sixers played one of the sloppiest, least defensive, and personnel-wise, pretty bad rotations from Doc in that first half and still were able to cut it to 3 and then even 2 at the end of this game after going down like 27, I think. I mean, if you look at just the numbers, Joel Embiid, 39 points plus 13. Ben Simmons, 17 points, 10 assists, 7 for 7 from the field, plus 4. He did miss 7 free throws. Seth Curry, 21 points, 5 of 9 from 3, plus 16. Tobias Harris, 20 points, 10 assists, 10 rebounds, plus 9. Like, the whole starting lineup was a positive. And I think despite the sloppiness, despite the defensive miscues, I honestly think a lot of it has to fall on Doc with first the lateness of his adjustments, like the lack of urgency almost, waiting till the second half to really change things up. But also the Sixers went down 10 when all their starters came out and they went to that all bench lineup when Atlanta went on that huge run to balloon the lead to the upper 20s. Like, that can't happen. I mean, this is the playoffs. You could maybe go 10 deep against the Wizards because they're the Wizards. It's the second round of the playoffs. You can't go this deep anymore, especially down double digits. I mean, how do you throw a lineup out there? And I love Tyrese Maxey, but how do you throw a lineup out there where he's the only one that even has a chance of scoring? And that's just with him sprinting to the basket. Like, I think we're beyond the point of having Ben, Joel, and Tobias all on the bench at the same time. And I understand where Doc's coming from. Like, statistically, if all of their minutes are together, they're going to be pretty damn good minutes. But I don't think you can afford to just take them all off the court for 4 to 5 minutes. Like, it just doesn't make any sense when every possession matters so much in the playoffs. Like, you can't just be giving up 17-0 runs and be like, the starters were just out. They'll come back in. And even with the starters playing so well in the second half, I mean, there's nothing they can do. And we saw him go away from it a bit in the second half, not going to an all-bench lineup when he normally would. He threw Ben Simmons out there with the bench guys, Tobias Harris out there with the bench guys, which I think was promising. And just like you said, a lot of things are promising for the future of this series. And it's not often I'm encouraged coming out of a playoff loss, but I genuinely think the Sixers will be fine, especially Joel Embiid. You could tell he wasn't 100% and he dropped 39 points. Like that, I think that was my biggest question going into this game. And the fact that he can still contribute at a high level. I think the Sixers just have to get it out of Trae Young's hands, blitz him on all those pick and rolls, double team him as much as you can, make the other guys beat you. Don't put the all bench lineup in, and I think they'll be fine.
Love that analysis. And before we move on to our MLB topic, just want to shout out Coach Tom Thibodeau of the New York Knicks, who ended up winning Coach of the Year. I mean, me and Luke both called that award on the show. Glad to notch another one in the win column for both of us. But
we only acknowledge the wins here. We don't like to look back at the losses.
Exactly. But it's a very exciting future for the New York Knicks. And despite an early playoff exit, I'm expecting that they'll be in the playoffs a lot more going forward in the future. And with that, we are moving on to baseball. And baseball is very exciting because not only are the Mets the only team that I cheer for that are still playing, but they are in first place and they are doing it with a bunch of replacement players. The Mets currently are 29-23, have a 3.5 game lead on the Braves, 4 games on the Phillies, and after that, the closest team is the Washington Nationals and the Marlins, who are both 7 and 7.5 games apiece away from first place. Now, the Mets, I think, are a very good team, obviously, with Jacob deGrom doing otherworldly stuff. I mean, we will get into a topic on him in the near future, I reckon, if he continues to pitch the way he has. I mean, there's nothing really more to say about him. He's otherworldly. He's amazing. He's by far the best pitcher in the MLB. But with guys like Marcus Stroman and Taijuan Walker pitching great, Edwin Diaz being a shutdown closer finally for the Mets, and with guys like Billy McKinney and Jonathan Villar and Kevin Pillar stepping up, and Francisco Lindor riding the ship, and Dom Smith starting to turn around, and Pete Alonso, and even with like Jeff McNeil and Michael Conforto out and Brandon Nimmo really nowhere to be seen, this team's still finding a way to be in first place. I mean, they have been in first place for over a month now, straight. No one has taken their lead. And it's honestly very exciting to see because as more guys get back, as they make some moves to acquire more players at the trade deadline, I don't know if this is a hot take. I don't think it's a biased take, really. I think that as the Mets get healthy, they're going to run away with this division. I don't think it's going to be particularly close either, especially with how the rest of the division has been playing. It's really crazy. And I'm going to start to transition this to the Phillies because there's really not a lot to say about the Mets. They're playing good baseball. They split with the Padres. They open up a series with the Baltimore Orioles tomorrow. I'm very excited to see how they do. I'm expecting a 2-game sweep and then another, hopefully at least split with San Diego as they come to New York this time for another, I think, 3-game set. But it's just very exciting times to be a Mets fan, especially as more guys are coming off the IL. But shifting it to more of a National League East perspective, this division just hasn't been great, so to say. I mean, Atlanta's pitching is just terrible. I mean, they're under 500. They took 2 or 3 from the Dodgers, but I mean, the Dodgers haven't exactly been the most healthy team. The Phillies are incredibly inconsistent. One game they're losing 11-1. The next game they're beating someone 11-1. And quite frankly, the Marlins and Nationals are just terrible. I mean, another hot take alert. I could see the Phillies finishing in second place in this division. I don't know if that's going to mean anything with teams like Milwaukee and St. Louis and the Padres just playing incredible baseball. But this NL East division is just straight up bad right now. And yes, there is still over 100 games left. But Luke, what have you seen from the Phillies, and why is this division just so bad all of a sudden? Besides, really, the Mets and, on occasion, the Braves and Phillies.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it with the Phillies, like one game losing by 10 and the next winning by 10. Sometimes the netting behind home plate falls. I mean, you never know what to expect when the Phillies are playing. Sometimes the guy on second base will get tagged out by the catcher because he gets caught between second and third. I don't know if you saw that video, but the Phillies are just so odd right now. And they've had some injuries, but how much of an excuse can that be when a team like the Mets is missing so many people and they're still 6 games above 500, growing their lead in the division with all those injuries, which is very impressive. It's something that, I mean, the Phillies are just going to have to learn the next man up mentality. I mean, it's hard to replace a guy like Bryce Harper, who finally came back. He hadn't played since May 22nd, I'm pretty sure. And Didi Gregorius is out now. But, like, I mean, other guys just got to step up. It's that simple. If you actually want to win and compete, you got to step up. And as bad as we're talking about them, I mean, more me. You weren't very mean, but they are inconsistent. They're still like just at 500. They just need to hit that stretch. I mean, they've had issues with starting pitching, center field, defense. I mean, you can look in any direction. They've probably struggled with it at some point this season. They just got to get something rolling, and it's tough because now one of the big things I wanted to focus on in this little baseball section was we had talked about the Phillies starting rotation, having to add in new guys. We've seen them throw in Velasquez, and he's had some solid starts, except for the last one. He's had a very solid stretch of 4 or 5 starts. And they tried to throw in Spencer Howard, who is this highly touted prospect that they've had for so many years. And they finally gave him the opportunity. And this guy can't throw more than 3 innings without losing like 5 miles per hour velocity on his fastball. He'll open games up at like 94, 95, and by the end of the 3rd inning, he's hitting 90 and 89, and he hasn't made it out of the 3rd or the 4th inning in any of his 3 starts yet this season, which is concerning. They mentioned he's on an innings limit this season, but man, for your young guy that you're trying to finally give an opportunity to not even make it out of the fourth inning, and his fastball is dropping that much velocity, I'm pretty concerned there because even if I don't know how many more years we can say, oh, the Phillies, they're a year or two away from finally making the playoffs, but you still want these young guys to like improve and get better for the next few years of Phillies baseball. But this is an interesting sign, and I don't. Do you have any idea what that could mean? Like, why is this guy just not? Why can't he do it?
Well, if I remember correctly, didn't he just have arm surgery?
I don't know how recently, but
He did have surgery, correct?
I'll look into that.
Because I mean, the only thing that signals to me is serious arm fatigue. I mean, just to cross-reference it with someone on the Mets, I mean, this happened with Noah Syndergaard where his velocity dropped and he got taken out for arm soreness, and he immediately was set back and he hasn't thrown a pitch since that outing. So it just makes me think that the Phillies need to be a little more careful with him. Maybe just give him just a ton of rest on the DL or IL now. My apologies, but it could end up being like, oh, if his velocity is dropping, he's going to start compensating, and then he's going to do even more damage to his arm than he potentially already has.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he might have a history of this because I don't see much about a surgery, but from last May, he was diagnosed with shoulder fatigue and like missed some games in AAA. So this is a recurring thing for him, that sort of fatigue, that inability to go deep in the games. And it's interesting. They've talked about his eating. They're trying to get him to eat more right before the games to have more energy. He talked about how in one game from running to first base, he couldn't slow his heart rate down when he went out to pitch in the next inning, and he was tired from that. It's just all really interesting stuff that is messing with Spencer Howard right now. And I think it's one of the more notable things about the Phillies right now. I mean, because it's just something that you don't see very often because I agree. I think a surgery would be the most obvious factor in this, but it's just so many random things that seem to be ailing him and like forcing this fatigue.
I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be a root cause for all of it. And honestly, there's still so much more of the baseball season to go. It's going to be really fun to revisit it a week from now and then a week after that, just to see how things are developing. But just to give a quick standings update overall in the entire league before we move on. The Tampa Bay Rays lead the division with the Boston Red Sox a half game behind. The Blue Jays are third in that division, 6 games behind first, with the Yankees 6.5, and the Baltimore Orioles cratering a little bit, 16 games out of first place already.
Are the Blue Jays back in Toronto, or are they still playing?
They are in Buffalo as of
now. They're still there? Okay. Is that a thing that could change this season, or is that most likely next season?
Most likely next season. I mean, hockey teams in the playoffs are having to get special exceptions to play their playoff series. I don't think the Jays are going to be back in Canada for at least another year. Moving on to the AL Central, White Sox have a commanding 4-game lead over the Cleveland Indians, with the surprising Kansas City Royals only 2 games back than the Indians, 6 games behind the White Sox, having an above 500 record. Very impressive from a team that was expected to be one of the worst in the league. Meanwhile, the Tigers and Twins are tied for last in the division. Heading over to the AL West, the Oakland Athletics lead the division with a record of 35-26. They are 1 game up on the Houston Astros, with the Seattle Mariners surprisingly only 5 games back of the Athletics. They are trailed by the Anaheim Angels, or Los Angeles Angels, however you would like to refer to them. And then the Texas Rangers are 12 back. Side note, Mike Trout is being done dirty. Shohei Ohtani is being done dirty. I want to see them traded to better teams because the Angels just can't ever win. It's honestly sad to see, and I need to see Mike Trout in the playoffs once before he retires. Obviously, NL East, Mets on top. Braves 3.5 back, Phillies 4 back, Marlins 7.5 back. Meanwhile, Washington is 7 back. Only reason Washington is behind the Marlins is because of the COVID postponements early on in the season. They have played less games than most teams in that division. Heading over to NL Central, the Cubs and Brewers are tied for first place with records 33 and 26. Cardinals are in third place, 2.5 back. The Reds are 4 back, and the Pittsburgh Pirates are 9.5 back. And then this crazy division, the NL West. The San Francisco Giants are in first place, 37 and 22. The Padres are in second place with the record of 36 and 25, 2 games back. The Dodgers are 3 games back of the Giants. And then everything just kind of goes downhill from there. The Rockies are 13.5 back. And then the Diamondbacks are 18 games back of first place. We have barely entered June, and we already have a team that is 18 games back. They just now have cracked the 20-win mark. That is not good. I mean, just from seeing that, and any impressions, any really takeaways from those standings?
Not really, Brandon. I'm tired, and I don't have much of a pulse on the league outside of the NL East. So I'll leave the expertise to you, my friend.
I mean, just to quick recap it, because obviously we are doing more in-depth NBA right now. Really surprising to see the Yankees 6.5 back. Think they'll be fine. Think they will end up making the playoffs, but they need to make some changes to that lineup and fast. They need guys to start producing. The Minnesota Twins, and I expect them to be this bad. I said my piece on the Angels already. Atlanta, I think, could be in deep trouble. And really, I've expected the Dodgers to dominate the NL West, but the San Francisco Giants have really came out of nowhere to be a thorn in both San Diego's and LA's backside. So
Gabe Kapler, baby.
Like I said before, for every other sport, and specifically the MLB too, you can keep it locked and loaded to the podcast. And now, because my transitions are not as good as they usually are, because it is 1 in the morning now, it's time for the Book It Picks of the week, and really the Book It Picks of tomorrow or today, really however you want to phrase it, because I'm not even going to waste any time. My first Book It Pick of the week, I got the 76ers and Hawks over 223 points. Don't think there's going to be much defense in this one. I think Philly's going to score. I think Atlanta's going to get their points. I think the Sixers win, but I think this over is as good of a lock as really any over in the entire NBA playoffs so far. Number 2, I got Utah minus 3.5 over the Clippers. I think that the Jazz are going to have a statement win to start off this series. They're going to show why they are the 1 seed in the Western Conference. Donovan Mitchell is going to show why he is a budding superstar in this league, and Utah is going to take a commanding 1-0 series lead. And then a little fun one for my third one. I have Seth Curry and John Collins each scoring 10-plus points. I think that these are 2 guys that their teams respectively need to score 10. I think Seth Curry could easily hit 4 threes tomorrow. I think John Collins could easily have a double-double, 10 points, 10 rebounds, or maybe even 10 assists if he's that focal point in the center court of that offense. Either way, it goes in conjunction with that game hitting the over, because if that game goes over 223 points, something has gone seriously wrong if Collins and Curry don't have at least 10 points apiece. So, Luke, I'm kicking it to you. What do you got?
Well, I went Sixers heavy with my 3 picks, and I went with a couple series length predictions the last couple weeks, and they've been unsuccessful. So I'm going right back to the well, Brandon. You can't keep me down. I'm not actually betting this stuff. I don't have any money to bet. So I'm going Sixers and Hawks under 5.5 games. Sixers are running the table. They're winning the next 4. I think And I know you're giving me the look, but I really think they found something, and you're gonna see with my next couple picks that I really, really think they found something. But I I don't know why I'm so confident about, especially game two. I think the Sixers come out and punch them right in the mouth. Like I think this is a team that is not taking anything from anyone this year, and Trae Young and Bogdanovich gave it to him, and rightfully so. They played very well, but I think the Sixers come out with a lot of energy because I think they know what it feels like to lose now, and like that's not a good feeling. And they're all healthy. I think they're going to come out and just dominate this series. And moving on for game two, I have Joel Embiid's over in points, rebounds, assists of 42.5. I mean, I think Joel Embiid can drop 30 and 10 any game against anybody. He had 39 last game. I'll take 9 points away. And all he needs is 2 or 3 assists if he gives me 30 and 10 or 30 and 11. I think that one, despite Clint Capella actually being one of the better Joel defenders I've seen, he's pretty strong. He doesn't look like he's as thick as the other guys that stop Joel, but props to him. He does pretty well. But I think Joel is going to get over 42.5 points, rebounds, assists. You can book it. And for the last one, you said there's going to be a lot of offense. I'm saying there's going to be some defense to start this game. I'm taking the Hawks under 27.5 in the first quarter tomorrow. I really think the Sixers are going to say the other guys have to beat us. I can't see them giving Trae Young any open looks. And if the other guys do it, they do it. But I think for this 27.5, I think the other guys are going to have to score a big bulk of it in that first quarter, because I cannot imagine they say Danny Green go out there and try and defend Trae Young for the whole first half again. If they do that, then all of this means nothing because they're going to lose the series in 4. I really think they'll have their adjustments, and I think they'll be prepared, and that's why I think they'll defend very well. They'll come out with some energy. So you can book it, Hawks under 27.5 first quarter.
Well, as you guys can tell, Luke has come out with the flamethrower to end this show. And what a show it has been. Thank you guys for joining us on another great episode of the Big Apple and Broad Street Sports Podcast. As I mentioned at the top of the show, make sure to keep it locked and loaded to the YouTube page, the Instagram page, the Twitter page, and the TikTok page if we get more stuff on there, which we will. Wink, wink. Right, Luke?
Yep. I mean, we have the clips. We just got to post them.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, thank you guys for the support. Make sure to follow now on Apple Podcast. They got rid of the subscribe button, so now you can follow. You can follow us on Spotify too, or Google Podcast, or Anchor, or wherever you get your podcast. So let's hope that you guys enjoy this podcast as much as refs enjoy giving Trae Young foul calls. For myself and Luke Milai, thank you for joining us on another great episode, and we'll catch you next time.